Welcome to Dr. Ruscio Radio, providing practical and science-based solutions to feeling your best. To stay up to date on the latest topics, as well as all of our prior episodes, make sure to subscribe in your podcast player. For weekly updates, visit drruscio.com. That's drruscio.com. The following discussion is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking with your doctor. Now, let's head to the show.
Hi, everyone. Today I spoke with Dr. Dale Bredesen, part 2, on his multi-component, about 36-component model for prevention of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, and the like. The main reason behind having him back on was because his 36-component model is fantastic, and I think it is bringing very important acknowledgement of treatable underlying factors that lead to the travesty of cognitive decline. Great. But 36 components is a tremendous amount for clinicians to grapple with, or for a person on their own, maybe reading a book or what have you, to execute. Having as I've harped on the podcast many a time before, and also I discussed in Healthy Gut, Healthy You, having a hierarchy and kind of an algorithm to prioritize can really help reduce the confusion, increase the time to healing, reduce the lab burden, and just generally lead to better outcomes. And that was what I really wanted to dig into in this episode. And Dale did an excellent job. He actually has now broken down the model into subtypes. And I find this incredibly helpful because now, instead of looking at 36 factors and trying to parse through them and really likely struggling, now we have subtypes. One is inflammatory. Guess what comes up with inflammation? Oftentimes gut health. The other is vascular, for those who are not doing anything that allows good blood flow to brain, like exercise. Vascular may be an issue. Glycotoxic, for those who have high blood sugar, as another category. So we'll go into the system or the subtypes in more detail in the podcast, but just wanted to kind of give you this kind of summary on what we will be discussing today. One or two other things I want to point you to. The type 1 in this subtype model is inflammatory, and this encompasses gut, sinus, and periodontal, or kind of oral health. Now, a great resource there for you is Healthy Gut, Healthy You, as I mentioned quite frequently, but also I want to remind people of the meta-analysis that has found that probiotics can help reduce periodontitis. So there are some simple ways to reduce inflammation as perhaps one of the main underlying factors of cognitive decline. It's not the only factor, but it's definitely an important and treatable factor that can be remedied. So if you're looking to help take a dent out of the inflammatory status of your own body, consider the action plan in Healthy Gut, Healthy You, and or a good, well-rounded probiotic protocol, which can really help reduce the gut-associated inflammation. So now we'll go to the call with Dale. His model, I'll just give you the overview really quick. Type 1, inflammatory. Type 2, atrophic. Type 1.5, glycotoxic. Type 3, toxic. Type 4, vascular. And type 5, traumatic, as in head trauma. So if you're looking to optimize your brain health, definitely, in my experience, as you probably know, having had brain fog while my gut was in disarray, your gut health is a very important facet. But Dale has now helped bring other facets into kind of a rubric of these subtypes with the ability to identify where you may flag and some action items on what you can do. So we will now go to the call with Dale Bredesen. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dr. Ruscio Radio. This is Dr. Ruscio, and I have back with us again Dr. Dale Bredesen, and we're going to be going into his model, or kind of following up on his model for, I guess you could say, broadly underneath the rubric of brain health, but digging more into, there's this great 36-point model. How do we try to prioritize various aspects of that model for the individual very much in keeping with the theme we've discussed on this podcast, which is there's a lot we can do for someone, but having a hierarchy can be very, very helpful in prioritizing and focusing on the things that need to be addressed that can make care less expensive and certainly get you to the goals oftentimes that you're trying to reach more quickly. So really appreciative, Dale, of for you coming back on the show and having a chance to try to, get to the highest level of efficiency and application of your model that we can.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great to be back.
In case people missed the first episode, can you give people just a real short synopsis of your background?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm a neurologist and a neuroscientist, and ran a lab for 30 years. And the whole point of our laboratory was to understand the fundamental nature of the neurodegenerative process at a molecular species level, so that we could understand well enough things like Alzheimer's and Lewy body disease and ALS to begin to fashion the first effective treatments, because this, as you know, is the area of greatest biomedical therapeutic failure. So back in 2014, published the first paper to show reversal of cognitive decline in patients with Alzheimer's and pre-Alzheimer's. We actually published another 100 documented improvements in 2018, and then just published the second book on this a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome. So fantastic area of study, and I agree with you that neurological-based conditions, and I would also argue actually gastrointestinal-based conditions are two areas where conventional medicine may fall relatively shorter. And certainly that's a very broad statement, and that's not going to be universally true. There are facets, I think, in conventional medicine that do a great job for certain neurological and gastrointestinal disorders. But on the whole, knowing that so many of these are chronic and degenerative in nature, it just seems that the conventional model isn't aptly suited for what is the driving factor or factors for many people. And I know we line up on that, absolutely. So we had discussed last time you were on the 36-point model, and before we started the recording today, you said something that I think is just so important. I wanted to reiterate it, which is this is a newer and emerging field, and as a field is developing, we become more and more efficient, kind of like the Rob Wolf analogy of a cell phone today can do way more in a smaller device than it could due to efficiency gains. And so a natural part of the evolution of any facet of healthcare, hopefully, is becoming more discerning, more efficient. And that's why I'm so excited to discuss the model, because 36 components, that's a tall order for a clinician to work with and also for patients. But that being said, as a quick aside, one of the really endemic problems I see in integrative and functional medicine, it's kind of like the paradox of plenty. We have plenty of options, but the paradox there is some providers feel they have to execute all of those options. And this is where we'll see the horror stories of $6,000 worth of lab testing, a $20,000 to $30,000 care package that was recommended. And while I think those are probably predominantly done with benevolent intentions, it's not the optimal due to the cost and the invasiveness and the amount of pills someone has to pop. So that's why I'm so appreciative of the conversation we're jumping into today, which is how do we make this more manageable?
Is a great point, and it gets back to the point that if you're trying to develop a single drug and you've got all these different things that are all contributing to your cognitive decline, and typically we find that people have between 10 and 25 different contributors to cognitive decline, so we have to prioritize them. Then that is a very tall order for a single drug, and I think that's one of the main reasons why all of the drugs have failed. Even the ones that have, quote, succeeded have had an absolutely minimal impact and really don't change the trajectory downward in these cognitive declining related diseases such as Alzheimer's. So you're absolutely right. What we went straight, we went from bench research. We simply said, look, here is the pathway that is critical, and there are many things that play into this pathway. And so you're right, originally we identified 36. There are now actually a couple more. But what you need to do is look at the top priority items. And so what we did was to classify these, and we published several years ago the subtyping of Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's risk, so that you can see very clearly some people have what we call type 1 or inflammatory Alzheimer's. So in those people, it's really critical to ratchet down that inflammation, and then, of course, to determine, most importantly, what's causing the inflammation. Is this a leaky gut? Is this periodontitis? Is this chronic sinusitis? Is this metabolic syndrome? What have you? And then type 2, which is atrophic, a very different cause of the disease. These are people that don't have a lot of inflammation, but what they do have is a reduced support, nerve growth factor, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, estradiol, testosterone, vitamin D, progesterone, pregnenolone, thyroid. All these things that are critical for keeping your synapses going are in short supply. And so there's a very different approach for those people. And then type 1.5 has some of both of those. That is glycotoxic. These are people that have both glycation of proteins and glyoxyls, giving you the inflammatory piece, but they also have insulin resistance, giving you the atrophic piece. And we used to grow neurons in the petri dishes all the time in our research. You always had to include insulin in there because it's such an important trophic factor. So no surprise, when you get insulin resistance, you are going to have less support for your synapses. Then type 3, which is toxic. And these toxins come in 3 groups. They are inorganics, like mercury or air pollution related things. And with the current California fires, this is a huge issue. And then secondly, organic toxins, glyphosate, formaldehyde, toluene, benzene, things like that. And then the third group, biotoxins, trichothecenes, gliotoxin, ochratoxin A, things like that. Then type 4, which is vascular. This is turning out to be very common. Vascular support to the brain, getting the appropriate blood flow, oxygenation, ketosis, all of these critical things, absolutely important and very commonly abnormal in Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's risk. And then the last one, type 5, which is traumatic. So many people have head trauma as a contributing factor as well. So if you can break that down, and we do see, there are doctors who most of their patients are getting better on this approach, and there are doctors who very few of their patients are getting better on this approach. And it really does boil down to exactly what you said, to prioritizing. And that's really the advance over the years as we begin to understand what are the most critical players for each person.
Gosh, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And if I'm being a little bit candid, some of the pioneers of different models I've found, they seem to have the constitutional way of analyzing information in which they're always looking for the nuances and how to make things more complicated, and they're not looking for how do these nuances kind of connect back to a common unifying trunk. And it's something that, again, if I'm being really candid here, must have been the coffee I had this morning. It's making me a little bit overly open, but it's frustrating because when you double down on that model, you really shortchange the ability for clinicians and for patients to have a ability to more effectively apply what might be some really novel breakthroughs in that model. But if you're not looking for these patterns like you're describing here, which I think are absolutely fantastic, you have more of a shotgun approach. Well, we don't know where to start, so let's test everything, and then let's just start treating the tests. And yeah, it's nice in theory, but oftentimes the testing results are not fully literally able to be translated clinically. And so what ends up happening is you're interpreting lab results missing the juxtaposition to the patient context, and therefore you end up in some cases mistreating the labs, mistreating the individual, which is why I absolutely love this model. So I guess, well, let me put a period there before I jump into some questions on the model itself. Anything that you'd want to add to that?
Absolutely. So we call this not a silver bullet approach, which is what you're trying to do with the drug, but a silver buckshot approach, because you are covering more than one thing, but you are targeting each one of those things. So you shouldn't have to cover too many things. And I do think that the drug approach is going to be very powerful when it's used on the backbone of the appropriate treatments. Mm. You may or may not have to use a drug with a person, but as you start to hit these other things and you target them them with a precision medicine type of approach, a silver buckshot approach, then I think we're going to kind of meet somewhere in the middle here, where there will be some sort of relatively targeted, not too large contribution for each person that we can do to make a big impact.
Sure. And the first component of your model, the inflammatory, or I guess the first component